This edition of Meet America. I'm Annie Griffin, your host, and today we're going to be talking about how your tax dollars are being spent on government atrocities to our wildlife. I think it's very important that Americans understand just how wasteful and cruel these programs are. And we're going to start with the 117,000 cormorants that are being killed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to preserve the salmon population. And of course, this is an insane program because it's not just the cormorants that need to be killed, but every other species, mammal and fish, in the ocean that eat and feed upon the salmon. So I'm asking you folks out there to please boycott salmon and help the salmon population come back. If you have to eat salmon, eat this farmed variety. When you go to a restaurant, make sure that the salmon on the menu isn't wild salmon. That's the only way we're going to save the salmon folk and stop this atrocity that the government is spending $1.8 million a year on killing cormorants. These are U.S. wildlife
We feel the public has a right to witness what the federal government is doing with their tax dollars. A situation of huge interest to the public. They got over 200,000 comments on this, almost all of them opposed. And we think the government has an obligation to be transparent.
From the Seattle Times, September 1st, 2015, killing cormorants to save salmon, 11,000 in crosshairs of controversial program. And you can get this on, just search Google and then Seattle Times killing cormorants. And so it's saying conservationists and federal agency scientists state that killing the cormorants will have little to no effect in boosting salmon populations. East Sand Island, Columbia River estuary, shots rung out, boom, boom, boom. Then there's a splash. Government agents gunning for double-crested cormorants have hit their mark again. Federal agents have stalked the tiny, uninhibited island with night vision goggles and silencers, blasting birds on the nest. They have oiled more than 5,000 eggs to suffocate the embryos within, and now they have taken to the water, firing a double-crested cormorants with shotguns under a federal program intended to boost juvenile salmon and steelhead survival. They killed more than 500 cormorants in just the past week, including 5 Brant cormorants not intended to be targeted. Under the controversial 4-year federal cormorant culling program underway since Memorial Day, federal agents could eventually kill as many as 11,000 adult double-crested cormorants and destroy even more nests. Hard at it Wednesday were 3 agents with Wildlife Services, a branch of the U.S. Department of Agriculture, outfitted in orange survival suits and shooting at cormorants from their open metal skiff marked research. This makes me sick, said Deborah Jacques of Astoria, a biologist monitoring brown pelicans that also use the island. They're shooting again. She piloted her Boston whaler past the island, alive with swirling and elegant terns, brown pelicans, gulls, and cormorants. The tangy smell of guano rode the breeze, and the sky overhead was laced with the stitchery of flying birds. As Jock approached the shooters by boat, coming into their view, they stopped firing, and as she drew within shouting distance, they stored their arms on the gunwales. All right, cormorant culling by the numbers. Adults killed so far this year, 863. Killed last week, 505. Nests taken so far this year, 5,000. Adults to be killed in 4 years, 10,912. Nests to be taken in 4 years, 26,000. Money spent about $1.8 million each for the past 2 years. So this is where your money's going, folks. And like Bernie Sanders, our good senator, who is so trying to get free daycare for mothers and a free college so that everyone has a chance to get education and good jobs. You have the Republicans screaming, where is the money coming from? Well, it could come from a program like this. Unless you kill all the mammals of the sea that eat fish, including salmon, this is a dead program. And the person who thought up this scheme should be fired. They shouldn't even be part of our wildlife service. So I'm hoping that you're going to call the Department of Interior and your congresspersons and your senators and let them know that you don't want your tax dollars going towards this. And please, folks, please just boycott salmon for a while. You know, you can go Google what are fish that are still something that you can eat. Trout, for instance, farmed salmon. I'm not a great fan of farmed salmon, but it's better than all the wild salmon that is being consumed by the humans, by the millions, and that's where the real problem is coming from. Now we're going to go on to our next atrocity, and this is a program on the atrocities the U.S. government agency is inflicting on our wildlife and how much it costs. Thanks for watching.
All for being here to fight today for the geese. Like David said, my name is Anja Heister. I work for In Defense of Animals. We're headquartered in San Rafael, California. I myself live in Missoula, Montana, and before you stand here and worry and ask yourself where my accent comes from, I'm German. No matter where you look, you see an incredible amount of urban sprawl. You see roads, you see homes, you see industrial business complexes, you see strip malls, you see golf courses. It's massive. And it's easy sometimes to forget what the landscape looked like before we converted native forest and wetlands, before we converted these natural areas into our urban jungle of today. At some point in time, New Jersey, for example, had enough wetlands and enough wetlands and wildlife species that it is set to rival the plains of the Serengeti for biodiversity and sheer magnitude of species. But we have taken away these wetlands, we have drained them, we have filled them, we have diked them off, and we have built on them. So today, there's really no place for the geese to go other than the parks and the recreation areas that we have created. These island green spots that we have created for our own purposes, for our own enjoyment, and which are actually ideal replacements for the habitat that we have destroyed. A well-known bird researcher yesterday told me, as long as we provide habitat, parks with Kentucky bluegrass and ponds, Canada geese will be here, and they are here to stay. And we the people want them here. We welcome them here, and we want them here. But it is our government that kills our Canada geese. It's the government. We have gathered today to tell the government stop killing our precious wildlife. Stop killing these beautiful waterfowl who graze our lakes and parks and who remind us of our link to this planet and all its creatures. I don't know if you know this, but the United States Department of Agriculture Wildlife Services is not only a for-profit branch of the government, but USDA Wildlife Services has a budget of more than $125 million, and they kill over 5 million animals, native and wild animals, every year with the most brutal methods, including aerial gunning, trapping, and gassing. USDA Wildlife Services has killed nearly 24,000 Canada geese in 2011. And what USDA Wildlife Services does to our wildlife is, in my opinion, and I'm sure you share my opinion, it is one of the greatest injustices and atrocities committed against our fellow earthlings. It has to stop. This is not about making airline flights safer. There are other ways to make airline flying safer, ways that do not require us to kill any creatures that have flown the skies for millions of years. Wildlife belongs to the public, and the will of the public is here, and we are speaking out today. We will not stand by while you kill the geese who were bred for hunters to kill and who escaped from those hunted areas to come to live in the cities where they seek protection and shelter from harm. The government's war on wildlife has to end. And we are gathered here today to tell the government it is not about people or geese, just like Mayor Bloomberg has said. That is not the issue. It is about ways to coexist peacefully with the animals of this earth, and we can do it. We are all here today to demand that the government's war on wildlife has to end, and it has to end now. Humane solutions exist, and we demand that they be used. We can't bring back the millions of acres of native forest and the wetlands, but at the very least, we can treat wildlife, including the Canada geese, with the respect, the love, and the compassion they deserve. We owe them that at the very, very least.
Here today on this historic day, as I'm sure most of you know, this incredible victory for civil rights, for gay rights, for human rights that we've won by the Supreme Court's decision. And I have to applaud Mayor Bloomberg for actually being on the right side of this issue, for being such a strong supporter of this. And I'm very happy about that. But unfortunately, Mayor Bloomberg is on the wrong side of the issue pertaining to animal rights. And that's why we're all here today, because we know that New York City and New Yorkers demand better. When Friends of Animals first learned of this assault on wildlife supported by Mayor Bloomberg, we came out in opposition, we organized protests, we did everything we could to reach out to the mayor, to express our outrage and disappointment, to express the fact that my office, which is right on 60th and Broadway, our phone rings off the hook from our tens of thousands of New York City members and supporters and people beyond who are absolutely appalled that our tax dollars as New Yorkers is going for an unnecessary, inhumane, and unethical slaughter of our wildlife.
Yellowstone National Park wants to kill 400 female bison this year due to their, quote, skewed sex ratio, a result from slaughtering almost 4,000 bison over the past decade. paid for with your tax dollars, all to benefit the livestock industry. The park has violated public trust for private interests. The foundation of Yellowstone is a safe haven for bison, not a slaughterhouse. Call Superintendent Wank and tell him what you think.
You want your tax dollars spent? Because this is what our cruel government does to the animals. The bison are sacred. An Indian prophecy has it that when the last bison and the last wild horse is gone, America will lose its power. And it seems that that is happening on every level. When I go out and ask citizens to vote for Bernie Sanders, I get so many people that are totally ignorant about who he even is. And Bernie Sanders, Senator Bernie Sanders, he is such a believer in taking away these programs that are killing the animals and taking that $100 million and giving it to students so they have college, for improving Medicare services for seniors. And I see some of these people that aren't educated about what Bernie has voted for all his years and stands for, turning away, and they don't even want to hear. And so that's the karma. That is the karma of our country, because there's so many misled people. People who refuse to educate themselves, to look at the records of the people who they're voting for. So many people seem that Trump, because he's a rich man, he will be able to solve our economic problems. Trump, who has a hot temper and will probably end up pushing the button more than any other person I know that would be a potential president candidate. This man who has taken so much from the poor to make himself rich, because that's what basically rich people do. So our bison, our horses, our fish, our birds, they're all being killed because of your burger and your fish and your meat habit. That's the bottom line, folks. So if you can cut down, you are responsible. You are responsible for that buffalo being slaughtered right now. He has to do that because the beef and cattle industry has lobbied in Washington so heavily that they want every last blade of grass, and that the bison have to be hazed so that they can have their cattle outside Yellowstone. And they're taking over all of our public lands and all of the legal herd areas for horses. And all because of your burger habit. So if you can just curtail your addiction for burgers and go get a veggie burger, you can get them at Denny's, you can get them at the Black Bear restaurants, you can get them almost anywhere. Ask for a vegan, vegetarian burger just once a week, and you will make such an impact. You will make such an impact and send a message so strong that you too care, and you care where your stomach counts and where your money counts, because that's the only thing that's going to save our wildlife, is you. Thanks for watching. Please call Daniel Wenk at the supervisor, the superintendent at Yellowstone, at that number, and tell him you do not want your tax dollars hazing these magnificent beings. These are people too. You're looking at a person in a different form. This buffalo feels, he thinks, he raises his family, he loves his offspring, he loves just like you do. There's no difference except his form. And until we respect all creatures on this earth, God will forsake us. That's just the way it is. You forsake God, and you do violations against the Great Spirit, whatever you want to call it, the universe, God, the great Creator, you forsake the great Creator is going to forsake you. A year, hundreds of buffalo are killed and slaughtered. For some of you, this may be hard to watch, so I ask that you turn your eyes away, but listen. You don't have to look, but yes, you do have to listen if you eat burgers, because this is what your burger habit is doing to the animals. This is all being paid for by your tax dollars. It's waste. Those are shock sticks. Very painful, very strong. They stack them like Auschwitz into these trailers to send them off to slaughter. Here you're going to see how your burger affects these beautiful animals. This is a documentary.
Towards the park on Highway 20, we have 3 snowmobiles, 3 horses, park service, maybe 4 horses actually.
The Yellowstone landscape is large and diverse, and the population of bison that lives on the landscape has a variety of strategies for survival. Summer in Yellowstone National Park is paradise. The grass is tall, it grows rapidly, water's everywhere, life is easy, and they're among friends. The herds become large, and the animals run and jump, and they have no worries, really. But as the end of the summer comes to a close, the situation changes. The snows accumulate to 3 feet. Temperatures drop well below zero. It becomes very difficult for them to get around the landscape, and you see them in much more constrained space. Single file to get through the deep troughs to the next patch of habitat, and the older females in the group are trying to remember, what's the best strategy for survival, and oftentimes they just, build that trail all the way into the low elevations where they can escape that really harsh cold climate of the high country of Yellowstone. Yellowstone bison create a great deal of controversy when they migrate to the low elevation winter ranges at the park boundary and want to migrate beyond into the state of Montana.
So we have this line in the sand, a literal line in the sand, where you have Yellowstone National Park on one side, where bison are respected and admired as a native wildlife species. I mean, iconic. People come from around the world to come celebrate this animal. Step right across that line and you enter Montana, where they're pretty much treated as vermin.
And the Montana Department of Livestock has a vested interest in protecting the economic interests of the livestock industry and cattle. So they manage through a variety of tactics. They call them hazing, which is chasing the bison off of their habitat with snowmobiles, on horseback, with helicopter, trying to push them back and keep them in the park. And then they also are authorized to just shoot them. The agents come out and just shoot them on their habitat. Or the third main way they manage is by capturing them in big corrals. They chase them into those pens, and then they load them onto livestock trailers and ship them to slaughterhouses.
Unspeakable things that now happen to wildlife in the name of brucellosis.
Brucellosis is a bacterial pathogen. It's transmitted primarily, we think, through abortion events, and it is only found around the greater Yellowstone ecosystem now for the United States. And the only remaining reservoir of infection is in bison and elk, and so there's a lot of intense focus around the Yellowstone system and controlling it so that we maintain cattle herds that continue to be free from brucellosis.
The Yellowstone National Park bison pose a tremendous threat to our livelihoods, and the reason is because they're so infected with brucellosis, and it only takes one. And that being that if they are on our property where we have our cattle and they have an abortive event and we have a transmission of brucellosis from wildlife to cattle, then we pay the price. The wildlife go on their merry way, and the livestock industry bears the brunt of the regulation and the cost. If there is an infection found, that herd is now put into quarantine. The quarantine means that you can't move any animals, so no marketing whatsoever, so that's a financial impact right off the bat. And then there's rigorous whole herd testing. Anything 6 months of age or older on your ranch has to be blood tested for brucellosis. There have to be 2 to 3 whole herd tests done, and then there's usually an assurance test a year later. So the duration of quarantine is long, and that's a really long time to keep your animals confined, and it's a really long time to feed hay that's really expensive. That type of quarantine confinement has the potential to put you out of business. If the interagency bison management plan was not in place, we would not be here. I couldn't be part of what happens up at Stevens Creek when they have to test and slaughter those bison. I couldn't do that. But it's necessary.
I don't see anything from here.
Buffalo Field Campaign is a grassroots conservation organization that's dedicated to protecting the Yellowstone bison and their migration into Montana.
We come out on skis and snowshoes, and we're checking all the major migration corridors where we know bison move through. If we know of groups that are in Montana, we're checking on them, making sure they're okay, and if they're not okay, then we're ready to document any actions that are made against them.
Our primary goal is to allow the bison that access to winter habitat and let them be on the lands they need to be to survive. Every spring, our patrols document calves with broken legs or dislocated legs being run, 10 miles or more, and then we see those calves die a few days later. At a basic level, it's very inhumane. It's animal abuse when you look at what's happening on the ground. This is or dislocated legs being run, 10 miles or more, and then we see those calves die a few days later. At a basic level, it's very inhumane. It's animal abuse when you look at what's happening on the ground. This is all supposedly carried out because of brucellosis, and yet wild buffalo have never transmitted brucellosis to livestock. Every year, thousands of elk are allowed to migrate from Yellowstone. Elk have been implicated in transmissions to cattle, whereas bison have never, but we're not treating the elk like we're treating the bison.
So folks, you just heard it. Animal abuse, and that's what our government can get away with. But if you and I were to go to do that, we would be put in jail. So, you know, there's a double standard here, and we have to stand up. And the only way you can is by showing the cattle industry that you're not giving them money anymore, that you're not going to buy their burgers as long as they're intruding on our public lands, and they're not allowing the bison to share the lands that belong to them as well, and their migration, natural migration that they've had for millions of years. You see, it's all you. You want to blame other people. You want to blame other things. It's us. You know, I'm an aspiring vegan. It's not easy. I love pork chops like everybody else. But I don't eat it because I know the consequences. And you need to do the same thing, Americans. You need to grow up and stop whining about how you have to have your protein. You can get protein from broccoli. And I've been a vegan, aspiring vegan now, 97% vegan for the last 40 years, and I'm here just as healthy and unhealthy as all the rest of you. So, you know, it's time for you to stop being babies. It's time for you to start stepping up to the plate and being warriors and saving this planet for your children, or why are you having them? Shame on you, America. Shame on you, all those wusses out there whining and while your animals are being tortured to death for your burger habit. So, now, let's watch the atrocities of the U.S. government agencies inflicting on our wildlife. Here's another thing they're doing. They're rounding up our wild horses and sending them to slaughter. Even though they say they're not, they lie to the American public, and they can get away with it. So I hope you'll call Congress, and I hope that you'll stop eating your burger so that you can save these magnificent animals.
The wild horse is a symbol, not only of the American West, but of America itself. Over the last 100 years, the population of wild horses in America has dropped from roughly 2 million down to less than 30,000. And if something doesn't change, many believe these amazing creatures will soon disappear forever.
Change begins with you, because your government isn't listening to you. They respect you, they don't care. So the only thing you can do, my friends, is stop giving money to industries that are killing off our wildlife and killing off you and I.
And I just think it's important you take care of your horses.
We've got ranchers and we've got oil drillers, and the horses are what get sacrificed when it comes to the land.
Imagine if you're married, you have your wife and your family, and you're rounded up and you're pushed into these pens. They take your wife and throw you in a pen with a bunch of other young, aggressive males.
Despite the love and respect so many people feel for these national treasures, the future of wild horses on this continent is in jeopardy. Many people believe this is the result of years of mismanagement, compounded by threats from recent legislation.
You know, the wild horses belong to all of us. It's not just the federal government.
The Bureau of Land Management, it's a federal agency that oversees public lands in the American West.
The BLM owns about 280 million acres in states like New Mexico, Wyoming, Colorado, Utah, Nevada. The BLM is the dominant landholder.
Some of it's used for extractive industries. Some of it's used for recreation.
And also, the Bureau of Land Management is in charge of protecting wild horses.
Organized roundups or gathers, generally conducted from trucks or helicopters, play a central role in the BLM's management of wild horses. Many people have grown critical of the way the BLM conducts these gathers.
There's nothing I've ever seen more destructive than a wild horse roundup.
You start out as slow and you actually do a lot of herding. You locate them and drift them towards your trap.
The males are driven into corrals on the left and the females on the right.
When we gather horses, we're putting back some of the best quality. We're trying to improve the herds.
They're auctioning the best horses off, where they should be leaving a percentage of them. And anything that's adoptable, they're taking.
These horses have families. Let them stay together, like people.
The idea of them being imprisoned in one way or another for the rest of their lives is like taking us out of our homes and putting us in a concentration camp. It's horrible.
My mother, who grew up in Romania, she said, "So what happens after the horses are caught?" And I said, "Well, they go to these holding facilities and they're processed." She said, "It's just like the camps."
We've heard all kinds of stories that they're being fattened up to go to slaughter.
What do you think of H.R. 503 and S. 311, which is the American Horse Slaughter Prevention Act?
I'm not going to comment on that.
It's a sick, insidious document. It includes the destruction of healthy animals, burning them in burial pits.
They're planning to, what they call euthanize, over 30,000 wild horses.
Euthanize is a very nice word for saying we're going to slaughter them. We're just going to kill these horses.
For decades, beginning in 1971, American wild horses were protected under the Wild Free-Roaming Horse and Burro Act.
Very recently, without a hearing or an opportunity for public review, Senator Conrad Burns from Montana snuck a rider into the 2005 federal appropriations bill.
The Burns bill, which became law on December 8, 2004, made it much easier to sell horses to be slaughtered for human consumption.
The new appointees come in with a different attitude, but the infrastructure that's there is basically Bush's infrastructure.
The very notion that the wild American horses will be slaughtered as a food source for foreign gourmets has struck a chord with the American people.
The Burns Amendment, I think, was put in place to help remove this, big glut of horses that we have in holding facilities right now.
There was no reason to pass the Burns bill, save for the fact that it helps the BLM avoid managing these horses.
A growing uproar over the U.S. government's deadly wild horse roundup in Nevada. Why is the U.S. government so hell-bent on getting these horses off public land?
The activity in the region is massive. Gas, uranium, coal.
There's a $3 billion, 700-mile pipeline that will purportedly transport natural gas from Wyoming to Oregon.
It has obvious implications not only for wild horses, but also for other kinds of wildlife.
There's probably a real feeling that they don't really have to enforce things as far as the wild horses go. That's why you see these horses going across the border into Mexico for slaughter. There's just too much evidence there that tells you in your gut, they're not doing their job.
These horses will be butchered and sent to places like France, where they will be eaten in expensive restaurants.
Santa Teresa is New Mexico's largest livestock port of entry and exports no other animals into Mexico except slaughter-bound horses.
What's happening to our wild horses when they go to these long-term holding facilities? Are they slipping out the back door to slaughter?
Many horse advocates fear that without this federal protection, there will be no future for this priceless part of our American heritage.
If any of these politicians visited these sites where our indigenous animals are being slaughtered in an inhumane way and being sold for meat, I feel like there would be a different approach to what's happening.
We need to remind Americans that the public land is our land and should not be sold to the highest bidder.
It's about the survival of the American West as we know it.
If you believe in change for America, then believe in change for America's wild horses.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
I think that if we don't do something, that there's going to be somewhat of a new kind of revolution in the West, where people are going to stand up for the rights, protect their quality of life, protect the things that make the West special.
I spent the 60s at the University of Wisconsin, and I'm no stranger to civil disobedience.
These are living things who have a right to coexist. Let's do something about this.
Stop eating your burgers.
They basically represent the spirit of the Americas in a way that we can only begin to understand.
What's at stake is the future of this country. Simple as that.
It's a symbol, I think, of our freedom. It's a symbol of the cowboys' freedom. It's a symbol of that we pretty much look at America and think, well, hell, we're free. And the horse looks like he's probably a little more free than we are.
If we can't find room in our society to do whatever it takes to keep the wild horse from going slaughter, I mean, that's really telling. It's an indictment against our society and our way of life.
I'm hoping that man will save the horse, because in so many instances the horse has saved the man.
It's just hard to believe that they want to euthanize these creatures.
The horses are in a battle out here for their survival. They're literally making their last stand.
If the public could view what was being done to wild horses, the public would stand up and take action.
What are you going to do, folks? Are you going to lift up the phone? You still have fight in you? Still have any guts left?
They have been and they are managing wild horses to extinction.
It says, please contact the senators on the Energy and Natural Resources Committee and ask that they support a moratorium on all gathers and removals, and ask them to investigate and hold a hearing to reconsider the Rome Act. That was last year. You can go to www.senate.gov. Tell them you don't want your tax dollars going to round up horses. $89 million a year is being spent to round up these wild horses because of your burger habit, your gas habit, your energy habit. People are driving big gas-eating vehicles now. And, it just goes on and on. So you are responsible, America. You are responsible too. And there is an Indian prophecy that states that when the last horse and burro is rounded up and slaughtered, America will lose its power. And isn't it coincidental that as we round up these beautiful, magnificent horses and our wildlife, America is losing respect and it's losing its power?
Are so important. They tie us to our history, they are part of our heritage, and they have no one to protect them other than us. So please act.
We've been asking this for years and years and years. There's only one way, and that's in the pocketbook. When the cattle industry feels us not spending so much money on their cattle, they're going to start thinking twice about our demands. I don't see any other way. Nothing speaks like money. Nothing speaks like the power of the people taking their money away and starving out these industries that are killing our wildlife. Here's another example of what your burger habit is doing. Buffaloes in Yellowstone that cross the line, as is their natural propensity to do so because they've been migrating for thousands of years to get better access during the winter to grasses in the lower regions outside of the park. So this is just another example, folks, of the atrocities the U.S. government agencies are inflicting on our wildlife, and which you, as a citizen eating burgers, are responsible for, using too much resources, gas, etc. And as a result, the animals suffer, and so do we.
Hi, I'm Andrea Abrams from Pasadena, California, and I just feel so blessed to have been able to help out Buffalo Field Campaign for the past week. I've wanted to be part of this organization for many years. I've been on the mailing list, and there's nothing like being here with the team and really experiencing what they do every day, day in and day out on behalf of the buffalo. It's just amazing. I have volunteered for morning patrol for the past 4 mornings, and in doing that I've been present for 4 different hazes in different locations. And I have to say that I honestly had no idea of what barbaric treatment these wild animals are subjected to. It seems really cruel and unnecessarily harsh to me to literally rid an entire state's landscape of its native species. That the intensity of it and also the ruthlessness of it just blows me away. Helicopters traveling right over their heads. I mean, think of how terrifying that would be. And it seems really, really cruel to time it, especially when many of the mothers are pregnant, and of those calves that have been born, they're all just days old. Really, really inhumane. Very, very sad. One of the things I learned during this volunteer work was that a lot of the locals moved here to be around the wildlife and welcome and appreciate bison and have bison safe zone signs in their windows trying to have amnesty, but the law enforcement officers will still haze them even if they're on people's private property. And you know, the locals, I want to make sure that I emphasize that I've learned that a lot of them really appreciate the bison and feel a sympathy towards them. Well, I do want to say that I feel so blessed to have been able to be here with BFC for the past week. I've wanted to volunteer with BFC for literally many years. I felt really grateful when the stars aligned in my life when I could be out here. I'm already planning to come back. I have not met a kinder and more thoughtful and insightful group of people. To think that there are people who dedicate themselves to bison in this way and really try to raise visibility for this issue. And frankly, some of my fellow volunteers are just fearless. You know, they are out there with the bison night after night putting out crossing signs if they're in danger of being hit by cars. The BFC is truly the voice of the wild bison in the United States, and I have nothing but admiration for the team here.
Can be here.
This guy's been out on the front lines trying to protect the last wild herd of bison we have on the planet. What's going on out there is truly outrageous, and I'm really excited for him to be able to be here to give us some more information about that. These guys work on a shoestring budget. They really operate with not a lot of money. They're super effective in what they do. Since they've been involved, the kill of the wild buffalo has been reduced dramatically, and it takes true activists on the front lines to get that work done. So I'm really proud to introduce a true eco-warrior and someone that keeps his feet on the ground. Ladies and gentlemen, the world-famous Mike Meese.
So what's it all about? There used to be anywhere from 30 to 60 million buffalo that roam continent North America. We started wiping them out as the white settlers, they called themselves, I like to call them the white conquerors, landed on this continent. They learned how to live here by the First Nations people, and then once we figured out we could do it by ourselves, we started killing them off, and in that process, wiping out all the things that they lived off in harmony on this earth with. We knew the stories of, there was a general back in the day, General Phil Sheridan, who was in charge of killing the Native Americans, and he said the buffalo hunters have done more to wipe out the Native Americans than any of the cavalry's efforts because they've removed their commissary and their way of life. As the progression of slaughter went to the west and kept growing, we heard stories of how the train was invented and how people would sit out in front of the train and just shoot buffalo as they traveled across the country for no reason, no respect, no reverence. And the slaughter continued and continued. Well, finally, about the mid-1800s, the U.S. government sent out a scientific expedition to see what was up with these bison, and at that point they looked and looked and looked and couldn't find any, and finally they found what was the last 23 buffalo in what is now known as Yellowstone National Park. So about that time the government felt guilty and they sent out the U.S. Cavalry to stand guard of these last 23 animals, and basically they started conservation efforts to progress to save these animals. They finally started the first national park, which was Yellowstone, and it was originally earmarked to protect the bison. About this time, a visionary that was with the Salish Kootenai tribe up in northern Montana had started to see the slaughter coming, and he would go out to the killing fields and start to gather the calves and the orphans and start his own herd on his reservation. So finally Mickey Pablo started to see that the U.S. government was going to do something positive for the buffalo, and at that point he offered 21 buffalo to Yellowstone National Park to increase genetics, give them a little more viability, and they had the Lamar Valley Ranch in which they brought in buffalo. Also a guy named Goodnight, from the Goodnight herd down in Texas, this guy named Allard donated 2 more. So hence the naivety, I love that shirt by the way back there, the naivety, oh that's right, good to see you. The naivety of the time, they brought in domestic cows and fed the calf buffalo domestic cow milk, and here started the problem. Brucellosis, a cattle disease that was brought over from Europe, was at that point given to the Yellowstone buffalo and hence the entire Yellowstone ecosystem. Now brucellosis is a non-life-threatening, non-fatal disease. It was basically has to be transmitted through an aborted infected fetus, so they expect a vegetarian cow or a vegetarian buffalo to walk up and ingest the afterbirth of an infected fetus, and this is how the disease is supposed to happen. Obviously, this has never happened in the wild, and this whole slaughter is based solely on one study that was conducted at the Texas A&M University, where they took the disease, rubbed it on their nose and genitals 3 times a day, guess what? They got the disease to transmit. In the wild, this has never occurred, and a living science experiment is going on as we speak in Teton National Park. Teton National Park is abutted to Yellowstone on the southern end, and they were only allowed to open that old park if they honored these grandfather grazing allotments that exist within the park. So for the last 45 years, they've had these quote-unquote diseased buffalo intermingling with the holy cows, and there's never been a case of transmission. Another very ironic contrary to all this issue is that the elk have the disease. The elk have given the disease to all 3 states surrounding Yellowstone National Park, Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. They've all lost their brucellosis-free status in their cows, which is what this hypnohysteria and slaughter is all based on. They've regained their status within a year, and it costs less than $1 million. So here we're spending, and these are all our taxpayer dollars going to this issue, we're spending in the neighborhood from $3 to $5 million to protect these holy cows over the hype and hysteria that this could even happen, and yet the one animal that has transmitted it are not even in the equation. Now, why is this? Well, elk have a major thing in the United States where in Montana everyone's an elk hunter. That's how people live. That's how they survive out there. And basically if they ever wanted to go against the elk, we would have the NRA, every hunting lobby and every hunting concession out there protesting. And unlike us, I don't think that they would take a vow of nonviolence. I think they would be out there with their guns. And so also your large tract landowners, ranchers, are given elk permits. So then they sell them to trophy hunters, and they make on average $5 to $10 grand per hunting tag, and so they don't want to divide and conquer their own base. Again, there's never been a case of the buffalo transmitting this disease. Now, to confuse things more, the Montana Department of Livestock has roped in 5 agencies to go along with this slaughter. We have, on the federal level, the United States Forest Service, the United States Park Service, APHIS, the Animal Plant Health Inspection Service, and the 2 state agencies are the Montana Fish and Game and the Montana Department of Livestock. But for some bizarre reason, the Montana Department of Livestock is calling all the shots with these agencies and basically directing and guiding this whole slaughter program. Number one, the problem with this, these guys have no education or background in wildlife management or wildlife biology. Number 2, they have the ultimate conflict of interest to even be involved in this issue in the first place. The last thing as far as facts that I think are very important to understand about this issue is there are now 500,000 bison in the United States. They're in every state in the United States. You can see them up in Golden Gate Park. But of those animals, less than 10,000 are genetically pure in what we call, all the rest are what we call beefalo. They're mixed with the cattle bovine gene, but you can't physically look at them and tell the difference. They all carry the characteristics of wild bison, but they're not wild bison. And that's why the Yellowstone herd is so important and so significant, because of those less than 10,000 genetically pure animals we have, these are the ones that have never been caged in, fed, domesticated. They've been able to be wild, and they're the last descendants of the contiguous 60 million that used to roam this continent. So they have the knowledge, the wisdom of the old buffalo, and they still carry that to date. So what's going on out there? Basically, we're out on the road right now because in the summer months and in the early fall, they don't dare kill the buffalo because 3 to 5 million tourists come to Yellowstone National Park to see these animals. So obviously, if they were killing these animals in front of the tourists, this thing would be over by now, and we would not have to be here in front of you today. But unfortunately,
we must close for this part. Stay tuned for part 2. And thanks for watching Meet America.